Hey everyone. This is going to be long, but I need to get this off my chest. My name is Mark, and I've spent the last 20 years building my business from nothing. I started with a small storage unit, flipping surplus goods, and turned it into a warehouse empire. I thought my hard work paid off in more ways than one, financially and in my personal life. My wife, Willa, was with me from the start. She was there when I barely had 2 pennies to rub together, always cheering me on. Or so I thought. Lately, things haven't felt right. Willa's been distant, quick to snap at me for little things. At first, I blamed it on the stress of her job. She works as a personal assistant to Dale Timmons, the CEO of Tim's Electronics. But then I started noticing things that didn't sit well. Late nights at work, her phone blowing up with notifications she didn't bother checking in front of me, and a general coldness when we were together. The final straw was last month. She came home late, reeking of cheap cologne, definitely not her perfume or mine. When I asked her about it, she rolled her eyes and said Dale hugged her goodbye after some long meeting. Something about the way she said it gave me chills. That night, when she went to shower, I grabbed her phone off the counter. She never lets me touch it, which is weird in itself. I guess I hoped I wouldn't find anything, but of course I did. There were texts. Hundreds of them. Between her and Dale. At first they seemed innocent, mostly work-related. But as I scrolled, my stomach dropped. There were messages about how she missed him, how he made her feel alive, and how she couldn't stand being with someone who was so boring and predictable. I knew exactly who she was talking about. Me. I couldn't breathe. I had to sit down. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the phone. The texts weren't just emotional either. She mentioned times they'd met at hotels, talked about their special place, and even joked about how clueless I was. My wife, my partner, the person I trusted most in this world, was tearing me apart behind my back. I put her phone back before she got out of the shower and spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, but another part of me needed to be sure. I needed proof. That's when I decided to hire a private investigator. Over the next few weeks, the PI confirmed what I already knew deep down. Willa and Dale were having an affair. They weren't even trying to hide it. He sent me photos, Willa laughing over dinner with Dale, the two of them holding hands at some fancy bar downtown, and one shot of them kissing in the parking lot outside his office. That one made my blood boil. Now I had the proof, but I didn't know what to do with it. Every time I looked at Willa, I saw her betrayal written all over her face, even though she acted like everything was fine. She still called me babe, and asked me how my day was like nothing had changed. The sheer audacity of it made me want to scream. I've never felt so broken, so angry, and so utterly lost. But if there's one thing I know, it's that I'm not the kind of man who takes this lying down. Willa and Dale think they're getting away with this, but they don't know what's coming. After finding out everything, I felt like I was living a double life. On the outside, I acted like nothing was wrong. I went to work, had polite conversations with Willa, and even helped her plan a family dinner like I wasn't dying inside. But on the inside, I was a wreck. My mind was constantly racing with plans, how to confront her, what to do with the evidence, and most importantly, how to make her and Dale pay for what they'd done to me. One night, she walked into the living room while I was pretending to watch TV. She was wearing the same dress she'd worn to our anniversary dinner 2 years ago. It used to be one of my favorite looks on her, but now it just felt like a costume. She smiled at me like everything was normal and said, "Hey babe, want to grab dinner tomorrow? We haven't had a date night in a while." I couldn't believe her nerve. How could she stand there wearing that dress, acting like we were a happy couple, knowing what she was doing behind my back? I wanted to call her out right then and there, but I kept my cool. I just smiled and said, "Sure. Let's do it." The next day, I met with the private investigator again. He'd managed to dig up even more dirt on Dale. Turns out this guy wasn't just sleeping with Willa, he had a track record. 2 previous assistants had mysteriously quit their jobs after similar relationships with him. One of them even filed a complaint with HR, but Dale covered it up by paying her off. I wasn't surprised. Guys like him always think they're untouchable. It wasn't just Dale's personal life that was shady though. The PI found out he'd been fudging company expenses, inflating sales numbers and skimming money off the top for years. This guy wasn't just a cheater, he was a full-blown crook. That's when the wheels in my head started turning. If Willa wanted Dale so badly, she could have him, along with all the chaos that was about to rain down on both of them. That evening, I went out to dinner with Willa like nothing had happened. I even brought her flowers. She smiled so wide when she saw them, like I was the perfect husband. It made me sick. At dinner, I noticed she was on her phone a lot, texting under the table. I didn't have to guess who it was. Instead of calling her out, I leaned in and asked, "Everything okay, babe? You've been on your phone a lot tonight." She looked up, startled, and quickly slid her phone into her purse. "Oh, it's just work stuff," she said, smiling nervously. "Dale's been blowing up my phone about some reports I forgot to file." I nodded and took a sip of my drink, pretending to buy it. "You work so hard," I said, almost choking on the words. "You deserve a break. Maybe we should go on a trip soon. Just the two of us." Her eyes lit up at that. "Really? I'd love that," she said, reaching across the table to hold my hand. I stared at her fingers wrapped around mine and felt a wave of disgust. She had no idea that her little fantasy life was about to come crashing down. By the time we got home, I had my plan fully formed. It was going to take time and precision, but I wasn't going to let her or Dale get away with this. They thought they were so clever, sneaking around behind my back. But they underestimated me. I didn't build a successful business by being stupid or weak. Willa went to bed early that night, claiming she was tired. I stayed up late, sitting at my desk, going over the photos and documents the PI had given me. Each piece of evidence felt like a dagger to the chest, but it also fueled my resolve. I wasn't just going to expose their affair. I was going to dismantle their lives piece by piece the way they dismantled my trust. Before I went to bed, I checked Willa's phone again. She'd left it charging on the kitchen counter. There were more messages from Dale. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow," one of them said with a stupid winking emoji. I took a screenshot of the messages and sent them to myself. Then I put her phone back exactly where I found it. As I lay in bed that night, I stared at the ceiling, wondering how it had come to this. I'd loved Willa. I still did in some twisted way. But she'd made her choice and now it was my turn. After that dinner, things became clear to me. Willa thought she was 2 steps ahead, but she was blind to the storm coming her way. My focus now wasn't just on gathering evidence, I wanted to make this hurt. She had ripped apart everything I thought we built together, and if Dale thought he could humiliate me while treating women like disposable objects, he had another thing coming. The first step in my plan was simple: patience. I couldn't let Willa suspect a thing. For the next 2 weeks, I was the perfect husband. I bought her flowers, cooked dinner, and even listened to her ramble on about work, pretending to care. It was sickening, but I had to keep up the act. Meanwhile, I started working with my lawyer, David. I told him everything: the affair, the financial dirt on Dale, the photos, the texts. I didn't tell him everything I planned, though. David's a straight shooter, and I knew he'd advise me to handle things maturely or whatever. That wasn't in the cards for me. Still, I needed his help setting up a safety net for the business. Willa wasn't just my wife, she was tied to a lot of what I built. If I didn't move carefully, she could cause damage on her way out. Once I had the legal groundwork laid out, I reached out to one of Dale's competitors, a guy named Roger Kane. Roger's one of those people who thrives on taking down rivals. He's cutthroat but smart, and I knew he'd jump at the chance to bury Dale if I dangled the right bait. I shared just enough of the evidence, mostly the shady business dealings, to get Roger on board. The guy nearly salivated when I showed him. "What's the catch?" he asked, leaning back in his chair, a sly grin on his face. "No catch," I said, keeping my voice calm. "You get to take down Dale and grab his market share. I just want him exposed. Publicly." Roger agreed without hesitation. He promised to leak the information to the right people, ensuring it hit Dale where it hurt the most, his career and reputation. With that part of the plan in motion, I turned my attention back to Willa. It was harder to be around her than I expected. Every time she smiled at me, I had to remind myself it was all fake. The worst part was when she tried to act affectionate. One night she leaned against me on the couch and asked, "Do you still love me?" It caught me off guard. I froze for a second, then forced a smile and said, "Of course I do. Why would you ask that?" She shrugged, looking almost sad. "I don't know. Things have felt different lately. I just want to make sure we're okay." I wanted to scream. How dare she play the concerned wife while sneaking around with Dale? But instead, I wrapped my arm around her and kissed her forehead. "We're fine," I said, my voice steady. "I promise." I wasn't lying. We'd be fine eventually, just not together. The real turning point came a few days later. I got a call from the private investigator. He'd followed Willa and Dale to one of their special spots, a boutique hotel downtown. He managed to get photos of them walking into the hotel hand in hand, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. But the cherry on top, he'd recorded a video of them kissing in the hotel lobby. It was irrefutable. That's when I knew it was time to put the final phase of my plan into action. I told Willa I had a surprise for her. "You've been working so hard lately," I said, "and I thought you deserved a little break. How about a fancy dinner tomorrow night? Just us?" Her face lit up. "That sounds amazing. Where are we going?" "It's a surprise," I said with a smile, even though my stomach churned just saying the words. The next day I made sure every piece of evidence was ready. The texts, the photos, the video, and even the financial records I'd uncovered on Dale. I had it all neatly organized in a folder labeled Truth. That night as we got ready for dinner, I watched Willa in the mirror. She was humming to herself, putting on her makeup, completely oblivious. Part of me wondered if she felt even a shred of guilt for what she'd done, but then I remembered the texts, the ones where she called me boring and mocked me to Dale. Whatever love I thought we still had was gone. When we got in the car, I handed her the folder. "What's this?" she asked, confused. "You'll see," I said, my voice cold. Her smile faded as she opened it. Willa sat in the passenger seat, flipping through the folder. At first she looked confused, but then her expression shifted: shock, anger, fear. Her hand flew to her mouth when she saw the photos of her and Dale at the hotel. "Mark," she stammered, "I can explain." "Save it," I said, cutting her off. My tone was calm, but inside I was burning. "You don't need to explain. It's all there. I know everything." She started crying, of course, but I didn't care. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, staring straight ahead at the road. Her voice cracked. "It was a mistake. I never meant for it to happen." I laughed bitterly. "A mistake? Mistakes don't last months, Willa. Was it a mistake when you lied to my face every day? When you mocked me behind my back?" She kept trying to speak, but I didn't let her. "You made your choice, Willa. Now you get to live with it." I turned the car around and drove her home, leaving her stunned and silent. As she got out of the car, I said, "Don't bother coming back inside tonight. You can explain everything to your boyfriend." Then I drove off, leaving her standing in the driveway. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't stomach the thought of being in the same house where everything had fallen apart. Instead, I parked at a quiet spot near the lake, staring out at the water while my phone buzzed non-stop. Willa was calling and texting, alternating between apologies and anger. "Mark, please let me explain. You're blowing this out of proportion. I made a mistake, but we can fix this." I ignored every single one. The next morning I went straight to my lawyer's office. David was already prepared. We began the process of separating my personal assets from anything Willa could touch. Luckily, I'd kept most of the business strictly in my name, so she couldn't take a piece of that. Then I did something I'd been planning for weeks. I sent an anonymous package to Tim's Electronics board of directors. Inside were copies of Dale's financial fraud and evidence of the affair. Let's just say when a CEO has this much dirt on him, it doesn't take long for the fallout to begin. By the afternoon I heard through Roger, the competitor I looped in, that Dale was already in damage control mode. It wasn't going to work. At home, I found Willa waiting on the porch. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she looked like she hadn't slept. "We need to talk," she said. "No, you need to pack," I said coldly. She started crying again, but I walked right past her into the house. You can stay for now, I said without looking at her. But only until we figure out the divorce details. And don't expect any sympathy from me. Her silence was louder than any argument. The fallout hit faster than I expected. 2 days after I sent the package, news broke that Dale Timmons was stepping down as CEO of Timms Electronics. Of course, it wasn't voluntary. Roger called me that evening, practically giddy. They're tearing him apart over there, he said. The board is launching a full investigation. Looks like your buddy Dale is done. I didn't respond at first. I was staring at my laptop, where headlines about Dale's misconduct were spreading. It was surreal knowing I'd set all of this in motion. The best part? Willa had no idea. That evening, she came into the living room while I was reading. I need to tell you something, she said hesitantly. I put the book down and looked at her. What now? Dale, he lost his job, she said, her voice trembling. It's a mess at work. Everyone's talking about it. Good, I said flatly. Her face fell. Mark, Don't, I said, cutting her off. I don't want to hear it. You made your bed, Willa. Now lie in it. She stood there for a moment, looking like she wanted to say more, but she didn't. She just turned and walked away. I watched her go, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness. Dale was getting what he deserved, and Willa was finally seeing the consequences of her choices. But deep down it still hurt. 2 days after Dale's resignation hit the news, Willa's mood shifted. She was quieter, more withdrawn. I think the reality of everything finally started sinking in. But I wasn't ready to let her off easy. That evening, while she sat at the kitchen table scrolling through her phone, I decided it was time for a real conversation. I walked in and sat across from her. Do you love him? I asked bluntly. Her head snapped up, eyes wide. What? No. Mark, it's not like that. Then what is it like? I asked, my voice cold. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you threw away our entire life for some fling with your boss. She started crying again, her go-to response, but I wasn't moved. It wasn't like that, she said, her voice shaky. I was lonely, Mark. You've been so focused on work and I felt invisible. Invisible? I said, laughing bitterly. You weren't invisible when I bought this house. Or when I took you on trips. Or when I spent every single day working to give us a good life. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, wiping her tears. It just happened. Stop, I said, cutting her off. You don't trip and fall into a hotel room. You don't just happen to lie about me to someone else. She looked down at her hands, unable to meet my gaze. For the first time, I saw something in her face that almost looked like shame. Almost. I'm filing for divorce, I said, standing up. You can stay here for now, but don't expect things to go back to the way they were. We're done, Willa. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. She just sat there, staring at the table as I walked out. Willa tried to stay out of my way for the next few days. She spent most of her time in the guest room or out of the house completely. I didn't ask where she was going, and frankly I didn't care. I was too busy handling the next steps of my plan, finalizing the divorce paperwork and tying up any loose ends in case she decided to get vindictive. One evening I came home to find her sitting on the couch, staring at the TV. The screen was on, but she wasn't watching. Her arms were crossed, her face pale, and her phone sat on the coffee table in front of her, buzzing every few seconds. Mark, she said as I walked past. Her voice sounded defeated. What? I said, not stopping. Can we talk? I turned to face her. About what? You've already said everything there is to say. She sighed and gestured to the couch. Please just sit down. Reluctantly I did. I didn't trust her intentions, but part of me wanted to hear what excuse she'd come up with this time. I talked to Dale today, she began. I laughed under my breath. Of course you did. Let me guess, he's trying to spin this as someone else's fault. Her lips tightened, but she didn't deny it. He told me someone sent the board a package. With evidence. About us and other things. I shrugged, keeping my face neutral. Sounds like whoever did it did the right thing. Her eyes searched mine. It was you, wasn't it? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence was enough. Her shoulders slumped, and she let out a shaky breath. You've ruined him, Mark. His career, his reputation, everything. Good, I said, my voice steady. He deserved it. And so do you. She flinched like my words physically hit her. Do you hate me that much? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. I don't hate you, Willa. I hate what you've done. I hate that you threw away everything we built together for someone who didn't even care about you. She looked down at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. He broke things off with me. I wasn't surprised, but it still made my stomach turn. Let me guess, he's too stressed now that his world is falling apart. Her eyes welled up and she nodded. He said he needed to focus on fixing his life. That he couldn't afford to deal with me anymore. I laughed bitterly. Wow. You threw away your marriage for that guy? I hope it was worth it. Tears started streaming down her face. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, Mark. I was stupid. I thought he cared about me. He didn't, I said bluntly. And now you're seeing him for who he really is, a selfish, manipulative coward. The same way I'm seeing you for who you are. She broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. A part of me felt a twinge of pity, but it was buried under layers of anger and hurt. After a moment she looked up at me, her face red and tear-streaked. Is there any way we can fix this? Please, Mark, I'll do anything. I stood up, looking down at her. You can't fix this, Willa. You didn't just betray me, you destroyed my trust, my love, and everything we had. There's no coming back from that. She opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand to stop her. Save it. From now on, everything between us goes through the lawyer. I'm done talking. And with that I walked upstairs, leaving her sitting on the couch, alone with her choices. Over the next week the house felt like a war zone. Willa stayed mostly in the guest room, only emerging when she thought I wasn't around. It was clear she was walking on eggshells, but I didn't care. I'd made up my mind, there was no fixing this. I met with David again to finalize the divorce paperwork. He'd been a rock through all of this, keeping me focused on the practical side of things when my emotions were threatening to take over. Are you sure you want to move this quickly? He asked, flipping through the documents. Yes, I said without hesitation. The sooner this is over, the better. We worked out the details, splitting assets, handling the house, and making sure Willa couldn't come after the business. By the end of the meeting, I felt like I was finally regaining some control over my life. When I got home, I found Willa in the kitchen, staring blankly at a cup of tea. She looked up when I walked in, her face pale and drawn. Did you meet with the lawyer today? She asked. I didn't see the point in lying. Yes. She nodded slowly, her hands trembling as she clutched the mug. So this is really it? It is, I said firmly. I can't live like this, Willa. I won't. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't waver. She had made her choices, and now she had to face the consequences. The next day I sent her a formal letter through David, giving her a month to find a new place to live. I wasn't going to throw her out immediately, I wasn't that heartless, but I also wasn't going to let her linger in my life any longer than necessary. That evening she knocked on my office door. Mark, can we talk? I looked up from my desk, my patience already thin. What do you want? I just want to apologize, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. For everything. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. Apologizing now doesn't change anything, Willa. You didn't just hurt me, you destroyed everything we had. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know. I don't expect you to forgive me. I'm so sorry. For a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the texts, the lies, the betrayal, and any pity I felt disappeared. Apology accepted, I said flatly. But it doesn't change anything. We're done. She stood there for a moment as if she wanted to say more, but eventually she just turned and walked away. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. The ties were being cut, and I could finally see a future where Willa and Dale were nothing more than a bad memory. About a week after I served Willa with the divorce papers, I got a call from Roger, the competitor I'd looped in to take Dale down. His tone was downright gleeful. "You won't believe this," he said. "Dale's life is in free fall. The board is suing him for embezzlement, and they're bringing in forensic accountants to go through everything with a fine-tooth comb. He's finished." I leaned back in my chair, a slight smile tugging at my lips. Couldn't have happened to a better guy. "It gets better," Roger continued. "Word is his wife found out about the affair and kicked him out. He's staying at some cheap motel now." Hearing that was the icing on the cake. Dale had ruined my marriage, but now his was in shambles too. For a moment, I wondered if he and Willa had been in contact since he dumped her. I almost laughed at the thought of them wallowing in their separate misery. Later that day, I was at the warehouse when I noticed an unfamiliar car pull into the parking lot. To my surprise, it was Dale. He stepped out, looking like a shadow of the arrogant man I'd seen in the PI's photos. His suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and his expression desperate. He walked up to me, his hands raised as if to show he wasn't a threat. "Mark, can we talk?" I folded my arms, glaring at him. "You've got 5 minutes. He hesitated, looking genuinely shaken. "I don't know what you've done, but everything's falling apart. The company, my marriage, my reputation, it's all gone." "Sounds like karma," I said, my voice cold. He flinched but pressed on. "I know you hate me. I get it. But you've got to understand, things just happened between me and Willa. It wasn't personal." That set me off. I took a step closer, my fists clenched. "Not personal? You slept with my wife, lied to your own, and humiliated me behind my back. How is that not personal?" He put his hands up defensively. "I'm not here to fight, Mark. I need a way to fix this. If you have anything, any proof you sent to the board, please just tell me. Maybe I can." "No," I cut him off. "You don't get to weasel your way out of this. You made your choices, Dale, and now you're paying for them. Just like Willa." For a moment he looked like he was going to argue, but then his shoulders slumped. "I screwed up," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "I screwed up everything." "That's the first honest thing you've said," I shot back. Without another word, he turned and walked back to his car. As he drove off, I felt a sense of satisfaction, but also a strange emptiness. I'd won. Dale was ruined, Willa was out of my life, and my business was safe. But the cost of all of it was my trust, my peace of mind, and the life I thought I had. After my encounter with Dale, the house felt even heavier. Willa and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was strictly about practical matters, lawyers, the timeline for her moving out, or splitting up our possessions. Every conversation felt like a negotiation with someone I no longer recognized. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table reviewing some business documents, Willa walked in, holding a small box. She placed it on the table in front of me without saying a word. "What's this?" I asked, not looking up. "My rings," she said quietly. I glanced at the box. Inside were her wedding and engagement rings, sitting on a folded piece of paper. I stared at them for a long moment, feeling a wave of emotions I didn't expect. Those rings used to symbolize everything I thought we had: love, loyalty, partnership. Now they were just cold metal. "I figured you'd want them back," she said, breaking the silence. "Keep them," I said flatly, pushing the box toward her. She blinked, surprised. "Why?" "Because they don't mean anything to me anymore," I said, meeting her gaze. "And I don't need the reminder." Her face crumpled, and for a second I thought she might break down again. But instead she just nodded, picked up the box, and left the room. The next morning I got a text from her while I was at work. "Willa, I found an apartment. I'll be moving out next week." I stared at the message for a while, feeling an odd mix of relief and finality. This was what I wanted, what I needed, but it still stung. That weekend she started packing her things. I stayed out of her way, giving her space while she boxed up her clothes, photos, and the little knickknacks she'd collected over the years. Every now and then I'd catch her pausing to look at something, A photo of us from our first trip to the beach, the anniversary card I gave her a few years ago, and I could see the regret written all over her face. But regret didn't erase what she'd done. On her last night in the house, she knocked on my office door. "Mark." I looked up from my laptop. "What is it?" I wanted to say goodbye." Her voice was trembling, and her eyes were already glossy with unshed tears. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. She looked small, almost fragile, like a completely different person from the confident, supportive woman I'd married. "Goodbye, Willa." She hesitated, like she was waiting for me to say more. When I didn't, she nodded, biting her lip. "I know you probably don't believe me, but I really am sorry. For everything." I didn't respond. I didn't trust myself to. The next morning she was gone. When I woke up the morning after Willa left, the house felt eerily quiet. No sounds of her moving around, no soft humming as she made her coffee. Just silence. It was strange, almost unsettling, but I told myself it was a good thing. I needed this space, this solitude, to start piecing myself back together. The first few days felt robotic. I threw myself into work, spending hours at the warehouse, focusing on expansion plans and new partnerships. My employees noticed the shift. Some commented on how focused I seemed, others just gave me space. In truth, work was the only thing that kept me from spiraling. When I wasn't working, I felt unmoored. At night, the quiet of the house felt louder than ever. I'd catch myself walking into the kitchen and expecting to see Willa there, or reaching for my phone to text her about something trivial before remembering she wasn't part of my life anymore. The habit of her presence was hard to shake. About a week after she moved out, I found a box she'd left behind in the corner of the guest room. It was small, taped shut, with my name written on top in her handwriting. For a moment, I debated throwing it out without opening it, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside were a few items. A framed photo of us from the early days of our marriage, back when everything still felt perfect. A handwritten letter. The rings she'd tried to return to me. I didn't touch the photo or the rings. My focus went straight to the letter. "Mark. I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I needed to write it anyway. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I'll never stop regretting what I did to you. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I destroyed it. I've been asking myself over and over why I did what I did, and the truth is I still don't have a good answer. Maybe I was selfish. Maybe I was scared. Maybe I was just stupid. You gave me everything and I threw it all away. I know saying I'm sorry isn't enough, but I need you to know that I mean it. I'll regret this for the rest of my life, and I'll never forgive myself for hurting you. I hope one day you find someone who truly deserves you. Someone who will love you the way you deserve to be loved. I hope you can find happiness again. Willa." I sat there for a long time, staring at the letter. Her words felt hollow. Apologies meant nothing after what she'd done. Still, I couldn't shake the small knot in my chest. Maybe it was sadness. Maybe it was just exhaustion. I folded the letter and shoved it back into the box. Then I taped the box shut and shoved it in the back of a closet. Out of sight, out of mind. A few weeks after Willa moved out, I started hearing things. People talk, especially when drama like this happens. Friends, employees, and even acquaintances who barely knew me started coming out of the woodwork with little tidbits about Willa and Dale. One of my warehouse managers, Pete, approached me during a lunch break. "Hey Mark, I don't know if I should even say anything, but I heard Willa's been trying to find a new job. Word is, Dale's wife found out about the affair and raised hell at their office. Willa's name got dragged into the mess." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Not surprising." Pete hesitated. "People are saying Dale tried to blame her for everything. Like, told the board she was the one who came on to him." That part hit me harder than I expected. As much as I resented Willa, the idea of Dale trying to throw her under the bus made my blood boil. He was a coward through and through. That evening, as I scrolled through my phone, I noticed something strange. Willa had removed almost every trace of herself from social media. Her once busy Instagram was now empty, her bio blank. The Facebook page she used to update with vacation photos and inspirational quotes was deactivated. For some reason it unsettled me. I wasn't stalking her or anything, but seeing her wipe herself off the internet made me wonder if she was unraveling even more than I thought. A few days later I ran into a mutual friend, Jen, at a coffee shop. She hesitated when she saw me, but then walked over with a nervous smile. "Mark, hey." "Jen," I said, keeping my tone polite but guarded. She fiddled with the strap of her purse. "I've been meaning to reach out, but I didn't know if you'd want to talk to anyone right now." "Depends," I said. "What's on your mind?" Jen glanced around, lowering her voice. "I bumped into Willa last week." She looked rough. Like really rough. "She told me she's been staying with her sister, but it's not going well. I guess they had a huge fight about what happened with you and Dale." I sipped my coffee, trying to seem indifferent. "Not my concern anymore." Jen winced. "I know, but she mentioned you. She said she regrets everything. That she doesn't know how to move on." I stayed quiet, unsure of how to respond. "She also told me Dale reached out to her again," Jen added, her voice dripping with disdain. "Apparently he's trying to patch things up with her now that his wife has officially filed for divorce. Can you believe that?" My grip tightened on the coffee cup. "Let me guess, he needs her to pick up the pieces of his mess." "Exactly," Jen said, shaking her head. "Willa said she turned him down though. Said she wants nothing to do with him anymore." I didn't know whether to believe that or not. Willa's loyalty was as shaky as her moral compass, but maybe losing everything had finally knocked some sense into her. Either way, I didn't care. Dale could try to crawl back to her all he wanted. It wasn't my problem anymore. "Thanks for telling me," I said, standing up. "But I'm done with all of that." Jen nodded, looking like she wanted to say more, but she didn't. I left the coffee shop feeling strangely numb. Willa's life was crumbling and Dale's was even worse. But none of it brought me the closure I thought it would. A month after Willa moved out, life started to feel normal, or at least something close to it. The house was quieter, my routines were my own, and I found myself rediscovering the small things I'd forgotten I enjoyed: late-night drives, long hours at the warehouse, and even cooking for one. One evening I got a call from David, my lawyer. "The divorce paperwork is finalized," he said. "She signed everything without contest." "Good," I replied, relieved. "She didn't ask for much," he continued. "She just wanted to leave quietly. No alimony, no fight over assets." That surprised me. Part of me had been bracing for her to demand something, to drag this out. But she hadn't. It was a clean break, just like I wanted. After I hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, staring at the finalized documents. It felt surreal. Just a few months ago I was married, running a business and living what I thought was a stable life. Now I was a divorced man with a new understanding of betrayal. The next day I got an email from Willa. It was short, just a few sentences. "Mark, I signed the papers. I hope this gives you the peace you deserve. I'm sorry for everything. I wish you happiness, even if it's not with me. Willa." I didn't respond. I didn't even feel the need to. Her words didn't hold any weight anymore. But later that week, I found myself driving past the old boutique hotel where she and Dale had met. I didn't plan it, I was just out for a drive, clearing my head, but when I saw it I felt an odd sense of clarity. That place had been the epicenter of my pain, but now it was just another building. That night, I sat on the back porch with a beer, looking up at the stars. For the first time in months, I didn't feel consumed by anger or sadness. There was still hurt, sure, but it didn't feel like it owned me anymore. I thought about Willa, about Dale, about everything that had happened. They had both paid the price for their choices. Dale's career was in shambles, and Willa had lost the life we'd built together. But most importantly, I had survived. I wasn't the same person I'd been before all of this. I was harder, more guarded, but I was also stronger. And as I sat there, I realized I didn't need revenge anymore. I didn't need anything from them. All I needed was to move forward. The first few months after the divorce were a mix of emotions. Some days I felt lighter, like a weight had finally been lifted. Other days the loneliness crept in, and I'd catch myself replaying old memories, wondering how things went so wrong. But as time went on, the bad days got fewer and farther between. One of the biggest changes was the way I approached life. I threw myself into my business more than ever before. Expanding the warehouse empire wasn't just about making money. It became a way to reclaim control, to remind myself that I could build something meaningful even after everything had been torn down. In the middle of it all, I started reconnecting with old friends I hadn't seen in years. I'd let some relationships drift during my marriage, too focused on work and Willa to notice how distant I'd become. It felt good to rekindle those bonds, to remind myself that I still had people in my corner. One of those friends, Jake, invited me out for drinks one night. "You've been through hell, man," he said as we clinked glasses. "But look at you now. You're killing it." I shrugged, not quite ready to accept the compliment. "Just trying to keep moving forward." "Well," Jake said, smirking, "if you're ready, I've got a friend you should meet. She's smart, funny, and trust me, she doesn't have a Dale in her life." I laughed, the first genuine laugh in a long time. "Maybe someday. Right now, I'm good just focusing on me." But Jake's offer stayed with me. For the first time, the idea of meeting someone new didn't feel impossible. A few weeks later, I got an unexpected message. It was from Dale's wife, well, ex-wife now. Her name was Erica, and she'd found me through mutual connections. "Mark, I know we've never spoken, but I wanted to say thank you. What you exposed about Dale gave me the strength to leave him. It hasn't been easy, but I feel free for the first time in years. If you ever need someone to talk to who understands, let me know. Erica." Her message hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't looking for anything with her, but it reminded me that I wasn't alone in this mess. Dale's betrayal had ruined more than just my life, and knowing someone else had managed to move forward gave me hope. By the end of the year, I felt like a new man. The business was thriving, I was reconnecting with my passions, and I'd even started dating again, not seriously but enough to remind myself that life could still be good. As for Willa, I hadn't heard from her since the divorce was finalized. I didn't block her or go out of my way to avoid her, I just let her fade into the background. She became a part of my past, a chapter in my story that I had no desire to reread. One day, as I was locking up the warehouse late at night, I caught my reflection in the glass door. I looked tired but content. It struck me how far I'd come from the man who had stared at those damning texts on Willa's phone, shattered and unsure of what to do. I wasn't that man anymore. Life had thrown me into the fire, but I'd come out the other side stronger. Willa and Dale were nothing more than ghosts now, and I was finally free to live my life on my terms. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt hopeful about the future.